Hello and welcome to Macros with Mythili, the ET Now show that takes a hard look at all the major macroeconomic issues and developments in India and overseas. In this edition, we're going to take a hard look at something that unfortunately has never been part of mainstream macroeconomic thinking or debate in India: the high economic and social cost of poor urban infrastructure. Over the past few weeks, the sorry state of urban infrastructure has come to the fore as never before. Reports of toxic gas from Belanduru Lake in Bengaluru, deaths in the Bombay rains, as well as from the landfill in the national capital, and our workers cleaning the sewers in Delhi have all added to the already sorry state of affairs in urban infrastructure. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. Is there anything at all that we can do other than wring our hands each time there's a loss of life? To discuss this, I have with me two of the best and the most experienced voices in urban infrastructure: Ahluwalia, Chairperson, Board of Governors, ICRIER, the Delhi-based think tank, also former Chairperson of the high-powered expert committee on urban infrastructure and services, and Vinayak Chatterjee, co-founder and chairman, Feedback Infra Private Limited, whose name is almost synonymous with infrastructure and not just urban infrastructure. Welcome to the show, Isha, Vinayak. Let me start by asking both of you in turn, why is it that so little attention is paid to urban infrastructure in India? Is it a function of our level of development? The fact that human life is relatively cheap in India and governments are not really quite accountable. But the question is, are governments alone responsible, or does some of the onus also lie with civil society? I'll start with you, Ishar, and then go to Vinayak. Ishar.
First of all, Mythili, I congratulate you for discussing urban infrastructure in your macro program. I personally believe that in the current phase of India's development, if you're going to have rapid growth, cities are going to be the engines of growth. If you want skilled professionals and innovators to come into these cities and invest, you need a certain quality of life. And not only our urban infrastructure, but even more so the state of our urban governance is so poor that we really need to talk of this as part of our mainstream agenda for development and not just something that we look at as an adjunct.
Vinayak, Ishar has summed it up really beautifully, but would you like to add something to what she's already said? I mean, why is it that we've been neglecting urban infrastructure for so long?
Ishar is completely right that this is now rising to the top of the, the agenda that has to be tackled on a war footing. But I'd like to step back a little bit and say that the root cause of it lies in the political economy and the way our constitution was structured. Now, in the early 50s, when the constitution was adopted, India took a very strong, shall I say, scientific view on the federal structure between a central list, a state list, and the intersection of the two sets, which is the concurrent list. While Gandhiji and others talked about Panchayati Raj and enabling villages to be self-sufficient units, not just economically but also in a governance sense, the same attention was not given to the political economy of managing cities. So while the constitution was adopted in 1951 with a federal structure, it took us almost 25 years to actually reform the constitution with the 73rd amendment and the 74th amendment. The 74th amendment is relevant to us because it actually then makes up for the deficiency in India's political economy and the constitution structure by saying the 74th amendment must be implemented and cities must be empowered, as within inverted quotes, to take charge of their own destiny. Now, unfortunately, that has not happened, and it has not happened for reasons which are also rooted in the political economy, which is that the center of power lies with the politicians in the state capitals, and they are loath to share power and the economic benefits that accrue with holding on to power in terms of empowering city and mega city administration, governance and finances. So, the root cause to my mind is a deep fault line in our constitutional structure of federalism at the third level, the non-implementation of the 74th amendment and the power structure between the state capital and the cities. But let me stop here.
You're right on that, Vinayak, and we'll come to the discussion of the 74th Amendment a little later. But I think, ICRIER, you wanted to add something now, or shall we come to it later when we discuss the 74th Amendment?
I just want to elaborate a little bit on what Vinayak has said. Basically, the 74th Amendment said that certain functions which really belong to municipalities should be transferred to city governments from state government. Now, where this amendment was faulty was that it did not provide for finances to cities so that they could actually deliver. Today, our cities are not empowered in terms of being dependent on state governments and the center for finances. One of the critical things that the state governments did not do was they did not transfer town planning to cities. Now, town planning is the golden goose. You know, when you change land use in planning, you can unlock land value, and with that finance, you can finance infrastructure. Now, if town planning remains with the state governments, that means that cities do not have that instrument to mobilize resources. They are dependent even on property tax revenue on the state governments, because as you noticed in the Delhi elections recently, before the elections, AAP party had announced that if we come to power, a house tax maaf ho jayega, which means 50% of the revenue of a city government will just blow up overnight. So I think cities have neither finances nor financial autonomy. They are only now accountable to people, and people have become so apathetic that they don't see the connect between deteriorating state of services and public health.
Absolutely, ICRIER, you hit the nail on the head, because it is actually cuts both ways. But even if cities did have the powers, I wonder how many cities would really, read out the Riot Act. But I've been wanting to ask you that you've been writing extensively on the subject, especially on the specific issue of waste management. But if I were to ask you to list the main issues in the urban infrastructure space that really need to be tackled and on a war footing, how would you prioritize them? Would it be supply of potable water, sanitation, waste management, housing, public transport, law and order? The list can go on. But how would you prioritize if you had to prioritize? Which comes 1, 2, 3, 4 as absolute must-dos?
You know, I would say water and sanitation above everything else. Because if you don't have water and sanitation, you don't have healthy cities. If you don't have healthy cities, you won't get smart cities. So for waste management, unfortunately, I think what has happened, I'm very happy that this government is talking a lot about Swachh Bharat and Amrut. But you know, Swachh Bharat and Amrut should have been integrated. What has happened is solid waste management is under Swachh Bharat, and sewerage and the rest of what is water and sanitation comes under Amrut. So one suggestion I have is that these things, these two missions must be brought together. The second unfortunate part is that the government has cut down the solid waste component of Swachh Bharat, solid waste management, by half this year. And the budget that they had set aside for awareness building, that also has been slashed. I think we need big time awareness on the need to not mix wet waste with dry waste. That is the first step, and for that we are responsible, nobody else. We cannot say that we will mix the waste and then municipality should segregate it. It only becomes waste when we mix it. When we don't mix it, the wet waste can be converted into compost. The dry waste has a large part which is recyclable, and your dimensions of the waste management problem get reduced from 100 to 25. I think this realization has to come to people as well as the government.
I'm really glad you brought up that point, Isha, because frankly, civil society must also play its role, because all of us like to point a finger at government. But unless we play our role, there's really nothing that government can do. But Vinayak, would you go along with Isha's list of priorities, or would yours be a little different, say law and order? Because even though water and sanitation is very important, as Isha says, if there is no safety, there's no law and order, then can anything be, more important than that?
Mythili, I don't want to be drawn into this game of a list of 15 things and then saying that this is number one in priority. I honestly don't think that's the right course for the discussion. See, these are all interrelated parts of the jigsaw in having a living, breathing, working city. Whether it is safety or urban transportation or electricity distribution or town planning or city planning or education, healthcare, like is being done with the AAP government in Mohallas now. So these are all parts of the jigsaw. Now the jigsaw fits into a frame of reference. If your frame of reference is incorrect, as we have pointed out earlier in the conversation, the pieces of the jigsaw that interact with each other and then make the city work don't hold together. You don't get the picture. What will I do by micro-optimizing, one part of a jigsaw? So I am going back to the proposition by saying there are many areas where India has taken significant strides. We have passed, acts which allow private sector to get into the national highways. We've got an electricity act. There are many interventions that have happened in terms of privatizing utilities like telephones across the country, etc., etc. If we do not take the 74th Amendment seriously, or if we do not empower city governance, I am afraid that piecemeal prioritization of select areas which either you are passionate about or I am or somebody else will lead to some kind of certainly some kind of a solution, but it doesn't optimize the whole. And I'm not sure that optimizing a part is what Indian cities are looking forward to right now. So I am very strongly still pitching by saying the time has come. The time has come, or I would even say is long overdue, when we require a political economy solution to the transference of power in a three-tier federal structure from the state capital to the city, the institution called a city or a town. If that doesn't happen, we will keep, just biting off the edges. And Isha has made that point pretty clearly, that if you do not give financial powers and if you do not give land use powers, what have you transferred? And then we expect our cities to be robust and deliver and all that kind of stuff, but you've emasculated the system by denying it the right to run its own destiny. Now, if we do not address that fundamental problem and we nibble at the edges trying to improve certain things, something here and improve certain things there, we will spend the next 50 years doing this and nothing will happen to the state of urban India.
Well, that does sound very gloomy, but we will address the issue of the 74th Amendment and transfer of resources and responsibilities to the third tier, but after a very short break. So please do stay with us. Isha, both Vinayak and you have emphasized the importance of the 74th Amendment. But the fact is that it's now more than 25 years since we passed that amendment and nothing has really changed on the ground. State governments are extraordinarily reluctant to transfer funds and responsibilities to the local bodies. And the fact is that, as you say, town planning continues to be with the state governments. But what can we do to ensure that this transfer actually happens not only on paper but also on the ground? Is there anything at all that we can do? Isha?
It took us more than 50 years before you had a finance commission which said 40% of the revenues go to state governments. So we have actually come to a stage where state governments are now at the high table with the central government. In any functioning democracy with vested interests across the federal structure, it is going to take time before the states will learn to share power downwards. But I don't think it will take you 50 or even 20 years, because I think the demand for good governance is really increasing. The accountability has already been transferred to the city governments. Now what we need is to get the state governments to transfer resources and functions, but also give autonomy to city governments to mobilize resources. For example, if a city wants to give better quality of service and needs to charge a higher price, as of today, most city governments have to get approval from the state government. There can be some areas where the city can have the autonomy to raise resources and then be accountable for better quality of service. I think this will come in the next 10 years, but the citizens will have to be very engaged in getting this message across to state governments. Otherwise, this is not going to happen on its own.
Vinayak, Ishwar, it is a very relevant point that none of it is going to come easy. But what is also important is none of this can be done without money. And it really brings us to the heart of every problem, money. Do urban local bodies have enough resources? And how much of the lack of resources is because they don't have the power to raise the resources? And how much because they themselves are reluctant to tax and make themselves unpopular? And if the current sources of revenues of municipalities in India are grossly inadequate for discharging their constitutional mandate or delivering public services, what is the way out? Is there a way out? Public partnership, private partnerships, bots? What can we do, Vinayak?
There is a way out, and it is already under kind of implementation. If you see the structure of the Smart Cities initiative, now I must say that the Smart Cities initiative raised hugely the buzz around getting cities to becoming modern and created a sizzle around rejuvenating Indian cities. Now, the model that has been adopted there is the concept of setting up a SPV, a special purpose vehicle for raising resources from the city and from municipal bonds, etc., and for implementing projects in a particular city. So, you have an SPV and you have a CEO of that SPV, and therefore, you now have 3 power centers that will determine the destiny of a city. One, the Department of Urban Affairs at the state capital, the municipal commissioner and his office in that city, and the CEO and his team of the SPV. Now, all these 3 have to be aligned to deliver what is in the realm of the possible in the here and now, without having to wait, as Ishwar said, for decades for 74th Amendment to find its true place under the sun. Now, how these 3 institutions are going to play out is extremely crucial in the next 2 to 3 years, because only if the SPV structure succeeds will it be able to raise municipal bonds, all other kinds of civic revenues which are lagging today, and the municipal corporation must then enable such cesses and revenues to be collected in an administrative manner, in a law and order manner, and the state government Department of Urban Development must allow this to happen. So, it is certainly a route that has been carved out to, in some senses, allow cities to at least do some degree of resource raising, and commensurate with that is the flip side of the coin, that they will also have to raise user charges to make those projects viable, because most of them have been envisaged in a PPP mode. But let me stop here.
Ishwar, would you agree with Vinayak that maybe the SPV model is a way to go, but ultimately how is the SPV going to service the loan, whatever you borrow? And that has always been a big question mark. We've seen in the National Capital Region how tolls have repeatedly been waived and completely been done away with. So, can SPVs be an answer unless these SPVs are able to charge, and raising user charges is extraordinarily difficult in a country like India? Ishwar?
Mythili, what I want to say is that what is being done in smart cities is very similar to what was tried even under JNNURM when we had public-private partnership, where the idea was that financing will come from the private sector. But what we have seen through experience is that if you do not have a revenue model which allows you to generate a return on your investment, or which allows you to raise enough money that you can pay for your O&M cost and pay the interest cost, no private sector is going to bring any money forward. This was a major failure of JNNURM, and what is the lesson that we should learn? Unless we do governance reforms, unless we have financial autonomy or some guaranteed transfer of funds from state governments to the city government, no model is going to work. You can put it on paper, but today you look at the smart city money that has been committed. You know, 500 crore for 100 cities from Government of India, and an equal amount is to be raised by the state government with the help of private sector and also some from city government. This will only come if you have governance reforms, if you allow them to charge to cover their O&M. One critical opportunity that we have missed is we've just had a major GST reform. What we had said in our committee was give 0.25% of GST automatically to city governments. That gives them some oxygen with which they can begin to function. So if you don't give them financial autonomy, if you don't guarantee funds to them, there is no revenue model. You can make SPVs and you can do what you like. What you will get is the private sector only coming in as a contractor. They will not put in their money. They will not put their money where their mouth is. They talk of PPP, and again, if you have PPP, you have to have a dispute resolution mechanism, because let's face it, there is an underlying lack of trust between the public sector and private sector. So we need to have agreements which are transparently and clearly spelled out, and which then allow you to have dispute resolution. That's the only way to go. But what I am saying is that these missions, as they stand today, have not provided for institutional reforms to keep pace with what they talk in terms of money. They have not put money on the table. If they want the money to come from the private sector or states, they must do institutional reform. It's crucial.
Vinayak, we're running out of time, but very quickly I'd like you to respond to the points that Isha raised very quickly, that unless we have some kind of a model, a revenue model and governance reform, and then there's a question of which comes first, chicken or egg, how do we respond? Vinayak, very quickly.
Well, the response is the same. I think after you have wrung the towel dry, you will come back to the conclusion that you need institutional reform, and institutional reform is embedded in the 74th Amendment. So, willy-nilly, all the arguments then actually tend to that answer, saying without the political will, it is unlikely that cities are going to rejuvenate themselves.
Well, it's a rather gloomy note on which to conclude the discussion, but I'm afraid that that's all the time we have in this edition of Macros with Mythili. Thank you so much, Isha and Vinayak, for joining me in the discussion and shedding light on why things are the way they are, and giving some excellent suggestions that the new Minister, Hardeep Puri, will hopefully take up seriously, and we will see some concrete action on the ground. As a former bureaucrat, admittedly from the IFS and not the IAS, he knows exactly how the best of ideas get stalled in India, usually with the bureaucracy. Thank you also for watching. Remember, we'll be back next week with yet another edition of Macros with Mythili. Till then, it's thank you and goodbye from all of us at ET Now. Remember, if there's any topic that you'd like to see discussed in this program, please do write into us at the email ID you see at the bottom of your screen.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/etnow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at etnowlive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/etnow.